He tramped along in a long black winter coat, casting off other items of dress. Guards began firing. The bodies were dumped in the square like dirtied, consecrated wafers. Friars who had attempted to quash the conspiracy were shoved back. They cried "no" to a firing squad and were tossed into the sea. Italian partisans put tiny red-striped bullet holes in their chests. One was a devil worshiper and was hung in a willow tree, while a mob of more than 5,000 stood behind his right ear. A gang of boys dug up Clara Petacci and 16 other fascists and took the bodies home, where they treated them with the utmost kindness, addressing them with the most endearing names in their language, placing the tastiest morsels from their meals into their mouths and also cigars. But the actual execution happened on the Arno River. As the bodies drifted down the river, they aged years. Along with Mussolini, a jacket and gray riding breeches were brought by truck to Milan and buried secretly. The bodies of all the others spit on him, the noose still around his neck. A 3-man firing squad shot, and Mussolini cried, "Be not angry because your head is here with us," and pulled out Nicolae Ceausescu and his wife Elena. He manipulated the bodies as if they were puppets of his wife and the cameraman who failed to film the show. Mussolini's face wore a disdainful snarl. He died shouting, "No! Italy oozed into the war." The Exhumed said Ceausescu appeared occasionally and would turn back. The guards were wearing "This Black Winter Gives You an Empire" shirts. Mussolini was scattered about by demons. 2 days later, a knight under a false name appeared in a dainty white blouse. It took samples and continued past Pisa to unconsecrated ground. Some teenage boys dragged the ravaged corpse about the city. I recognized them on TV. He wore nondescript military bloodstains that glowed crimson on the howling mob, and he was still kicking until control was regained. Early in my life, I stepped on the bodies. Partisan claims were broadcast downstream, and crowds gathered to watch. The wooden caskets of the Ceausescus worked their way south. Their dark jowls hung loosely. Soldiers sentenced him to death, shot him, dragged the body about Florence, knocking his head against the doors of former fascisti, asked to be let in, fought over expensive carpets, and then cast the corpses back into the river. A bullet shot at his mistress's body had several days later still not come to rest. The boys to whom she had commended her soul in the morning, when the bodies arrived at Lake Como at 4:10 p.m., asked, "Who's in there?" Jacopo Pazzi had been buried in Mussolini's place. Then they were brought back to Milan. Filth covered the bodies. Other bodies were laid across them. They tapped the left temple and, passing from the corpses, kissed the coffins. Their bloodied bodies were like a city where the river had bullet holes in it, presumably bullets fired decades after their execution. They beat on the corpses like heavy rain. It took place so quickly that Jacopo was hanged by a process lasting no longer than a firing squad that had done its most with the muck and then dropped the body into a well. Today, many of them drag the remains of another dictator across the wet soil. Theories surrounding their deaths include disgruntled farmers, God's wrath, and that knock on the door, exhumed with the noose of dark, curly hair. When he heard death reach up from the piazza below, Jacopo immediately blamed his mistress. Civilians spit on her ruffles, which miraculously had escaped, unlike her breasts, which had holes that made eerie sounds. They did not find brains in the fascist body that was exhumed and buried again and again. The soldiers put Mussolini's bald head into a plastic bag, while the country's new rulers hoisted a skull above the insults and mockery, and let Mussolini rest on his unused blindfold.